And now, it's BoomerLife, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is BoomerLife on CIL 650.
Last night, I didn't get to sleep. No, I didn't get to sleep at all.
Hey, and welcome to the show. Perfect intro for today's show. We're talking about getting a good night's sleep, and our guest is Dr. Charnel Muir, the SnoreDentist, and the very easy to remember SnoreDentist.ca website. And your slogan is sleep better, live better. Pretty simple philosophy, right?
It is.
and a simple equation that a lot of people don't really have, do they?
No, a lot of people just don't know why they're not feeling well, or they have a lot of, crouching medical conditions, and they're just not sure what's causing it. But really, sleep plays a large role in a lot of those things.
And snoring is an indicator that things aren't going well,
It certainly can be, yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of people will know they snore, and they just haven't done anything about it yet.
And also joining us for today is Steve Wick. He's the author of a book called Kicking the Bear Out of the Bedroom. And Charnel, why don't you introduce our guest a little more, and your encounters and what he's been able to accomplish, or is it his story, I guess?
Yeah, I've known Steve Wick for a number of years now. He's very experienced in the field in a number of ways, but he really is a sleep apnea sufferer who went through for a long time not knowing that he had sleep apnea, and then really has become a great proponent to getting this condition diagnosed and treated properly.
Well, Steve, with that, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And you're just south of us, right, in Washington State?
Yes, correct. I'm just outside of Seattle.
All right, and good to have you on the show. So, as Dr. Muir mentioned, you didn't know you had an issue with your sleep. What were the symptoms, or what led you to believe you needed to find out more about it?
Well, I call it bruised rib syndrome, and it was brought on by my wife, elbowing me in the middle of the night to wake up because I continued to snore. And what was funny is I would respond to her, how can I be snoring? I'm not even asleep. And I guess that's more common than I realized, because people that are suffering from sleep apnea aren't getting much sleep. But at the time, I finally went and saw a doctor because my wife was complaining that she wasn't sleeping either. So that was the initial reason for me seeing the physician.
Now, in your experience, and Dr. Muir, you can jump in on this, what does a doctor typically do then? I mean, this is something that really has come to the forefront in the last 10 years, but maybe your physician isn't up to speed on sleeping issues. So what did your doctor do for you, Steve?
Well, and many physicians aren't, and which is unfortunate, because they learn so much in medical school. There's only so much time, and sleep is kind of bypassed. But they'll typically ask you, and my doctor did, am I having trouble or excessive daytime sleepiness, it's called. And as I thought back on my day-to-day activities, lo and behold, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was typically looking for a place to rest for half an hour, to either fall asleep or sit down and rest, which, everybody thinks I work hard, I play hard, I'm a little tired in the afternoon, but in reality, that's not normal. And so that was one of the first signs, other than the snoring, that there was an additional problem going on, was the excessive daytime sleepiness.
And is, Dr. Muir, some people just like a nap. And we hear over and over that naps are good for you. So what's the line between I like to have a nap and I feel refreshed afterwards and I can charge on through the rest of the day, or I have excessive sleepiness?
Well, the difference is I like to have a nap and I have to have a nap.
Right.
Right? Like if someone's trying to get through the day and they just can't function at a normal level, or they can't get it through a day without that nap or that downtime, then there might be something wrong, or there might be something that should be looked at. And, Steve picked up on it perfectly. It's common, so people think it's normal. Mm-hmm. Because it's so common, it's therefore become normal. We think we're living at a normal level of tiredness, when in fact there could be something underlying.
So the bruised rib that got you to the doctor was more a function of the noise rather than you, Steve, having lack of alertness through the day.
Correct. Yeah. Again, I thought it was normal. And like Dr. Muir mentioned, most people do. And so for me, it was to placate my wife and to be able to sleep in the same bed. I took the step of going to see the doctor.
And then what was the result of those visits?
Well, it was actually kind of funny is that I had complained to the doctor initially when I said, well, the doctor suggested I have what's called a sleep test or a sleep study. And I said, well, why do I need that? You know, all I do is snore. And they said, well, that's a symptom of something that may be a more critical condition called sleep apnea. And that means that you quit breathing throughout the night. And I said, well, I don't do that. I'm a light sleeper, but it's just the snoring issue. So anyway, long story short, I had to have the sleep test, and the results came back, and I went back to the physician to go over the results, and she was laughing, and I said, you know, what's so funny? And she said, you remember you told me you were a light sleeper? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, the results of your sleep test came back, and it shows that every hour throughout the night, you're actually waking up 73 times because you're not breathing. And your body says, wake up, dummy, you're dying, you're not breathing. You get a shot of adrenaline to your heart, it wakes you up, and then you fall back asleep. So, yes, I was a light sleeper. In fact, I wasn't sleeping at all, but I had no idea.
And that's common, Dr. Muir?
It is, and people will often say that, you know, they wake up and they felt like they haven't slept at all night long. And they probably have, but they've stayed in this light sleep or this interrupted sleep throughout the entire night. So they've never got the deep, restful sleep that they really need to be able to function the next day.
So Steve Wick is our guest. He has written a book called Kicking the Bear Out of the Bedroom, talking about snoring and sleep apnea. Now, Steve, if your doctor wasn't that aware of the problems that could arise from not getting a good night's sleep, where do you think you'd be today?
I would be right where I was, and actually right where I ended up, because after I got the results of the sleep study, I ended up with what's called a CPAP. And for people who are familiar with it, they'll know what that means. But it's essentially a vacuum that's turned on backwards, and you put the hose in your mouth, and the air pressure keeps your airway open throughout the night. But
that sounds comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like sleeping with a Darth Vader mask on. And but that was the gold standard, and still is the gold standard of treatment. Unfortunately, it isn't very comfortable to sleep with, and the research shows that after about 2 years, 50% of people who are given that treatment option have quit, and they just put it in the closet and they go on being sick, which is unfortunate. But that's what happens because it's not an easy device to sleep with. And
then what was the course? I mean, so you didn't tolerate this? What happened then?
Well, so the interesting thing is I was still fine. My wife was upset that I was snoring again because I quit using the CPAP. But what really pushed me over the edge was that we got pregnant with our first child, and I went to get life insurance. And my insurance adjuster said, "You're uninsurable. You're going to die." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, we have access to your medical records, and it shows you were diagnosed with sleep apnea, and you're not using your CPAP." And so with that combination, you know, you're not going to last. You're going to die, and so we're not willing to insure you. And that
I just want to jump in. I just want to jump in for a sec. So, Dr. Muir, what would you die from if you have continuous sleep apnea? Is it blood pressure?
Well, probably a cardiovascular event. Mm-hmm. So there's a much higher rate of fatal and non-fatal heart attacks and
while you're
stroke.
Sleeping?
It can happen anytime during the day, but the most common time for a heart attack will be somewhere between 4 and 9 in the morning.
So after you've gotten up and started your day? Some
people do, yes.
Okay, yeah. Sorry to interrupt, Steve. I just wanted to get some clarification there.
No problem, and I'm glad that she brought that up. But it also increases high blood pressure. There's a higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease. There's any number of what are called comorbidities that go along with untreated sleep apnea. And so that, again, brought it to the forefront of my attention. If an insurance company won't take my money, there's got to be something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to my sleep doctor and said, this is my scenario. I can't get life insurance. I can't wear the CPAP. What do I do now? And because of the severity of my disease, he said there aren't any options. And it just so happened that he had what's called an oral appliance sitting on his desk. And I said, what's that? And he said, it's a device that we use in place of a CPAP, but it doesn't work for somebody of your severity. And luckily, I was able to convince him to let me try it, and it worked. So I found a treatment that I could tolerate that worked, and life has been good ever since. But he wasn't willing to share that information with me initially, and because of that, I became I jumped into the industry and started looking at there's got to be a better solution, a better way for this to happen, and things have come a long ways in 5 years. But that's still a problem, is that people are unaware that there are alternatives. And so for listeners out there who have a CPAP, who aren't using it or are struggling with it, there are options, and you just need to find the right doctor that will share them with you.
You sound like a young guy, and you're saying this is 5 years ago you started to get into this?
Oh, well, I know when I look back on my life, even as a teenager, I was a restless sleeper. I'd wake up and my sheets and blanket would be on the floor. Mm-hmm. And I know that I probably had sleep apnea for 30 years before it was diagnosed. And so, and my 9-year-old daughter was diagnosed with sleep apnea. So it's not just, we used to think it was a disease that old men got, or overweight men, and in reality, it's anybody can get it, and there's no rhyme or reason why you get it, but even kids.
And you're right, Steve. I think that's one of the commonly held myths. It's a fat old man's disease. I can't possibly have something like that because I'm a fairly slender 38-year-old woman. Well, it can affect anyone, and especially if they have a parent or grandparent that snored.
Yeah, do you have snorers in your family? Your father or grandfather, anybody?
My grandfather, it's funny, in the book it talks about my experience with him, remembering back when we were kids and I had 7 cousins, and we would spend holidays at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and he would wake the entire house up snoring. And then we would have contests as kids to see who could mimic him, and we'd have snoring contests, and we thought it was hilarious. But as he aged, and at that time I'd never heard of sleep apnea, and I don't think probably majority of even the medical community had, but he died of a heart attack after dinner one night, and I know, knowing what I know now, I know he had sleep apnea. As a matter of fact, on a road trip one time, he fell asleep in his Cadillac with the cruise control on, went off the shoulder and into a wheat field in eastern Washington, and was asleep there with the wheels spinning in the mud when the state patrol walked up and tapped on his window. And so he'd fallen asleep driving, which is another issue for sleep apneics, is that, you're tired during the day and you're driving. Oftentimes, auto accidents have been attributed to daytime sleepiness.
That's the voice of Steve Wick, who's written the book, Kicking the Bear Out of the Bedroom, Snoring and Sleep Apnea, The Not-So-Silent Killers. And we have Dr. Charnel Muir here, our resident snore dentist, and you can visit her website, snoredentist.ca. We'll continue our conversation next on CL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.